July 4th, 1945, 0820 hours. Schönberg District, American Sector, Berlin. Frau Elisabeth Müller stood in what had been her kitchen, balancing on broken floorboards above a cellar filled with rubble. Around her, Berlin stretched in every direction as a landscape of total destruction. 80% of the buildings were damaged or destroyed. The Tiergarten's ancient trees had been cut for firewood during the final siege. The Reichstag was a burned shell. The Kaiser Wilhelm Memorial Church stood roofless against gray sky, its spire shattered, stained glass ground into colored dust in the streets below. Her family, herself, her elderly mother, and 2 children ages 7 and 9, lived in 3 rooms of what had been a 6-story apartment building. The upper floors had collapsed during a February air raid. They shared the space with 2 other families, all of them surviving on whatever they could scavenge. Her children hadn't eaten a proper meal in 4 days. Her mother's cough sounded like the pneumonia that was killing people daily in the ruins. She heard the trucks before she saw them. American military vehicles rumbling down streets cleared just days earlier. Elizabeth's first instinct was to hide. The propaganda had been explicit. Allied occupation would mean revenge, starvation, brutality. Germany had bombed London, had committed atrocities across Europe. Now, Berlin lay defeated. What mercy could Germans expect? But she was too tired and too hungry to hide. They had no reserves left, no strength for hiding, no energy for fear. She stayed standing on her broken floor, watching as American trucks rolled into the square that had once been a marketplace. The trucks stopped in perfect formation. American soldiers jumped down, young men in clean uniforms that seemed impossibly well supplied. They moved with energy that comes from adequate food, luxuries that had become foreign to Berlin's survivors. Elizabeth waited for them to begin requisitioning supplies, imposing harsh occupation. Instead, the soldiers started unloading crates. Not weapons, food, medical supplies, building materials, crate after crate stacked under officers' supervision. A sergeant approached, speaking German with a heavy accent. "Ma'am, we're establishing a distribution point here. Food rations, medical supplies, basic necessities. You'll need to register, but starting tomorrow morning, this location will provide supplies to all registered residents in this district." Elizabeth stared. A young soldier repeated it slowly. "Free food for civilians, you and your family, starting tomorrow." "You're giving us food?" Elizabeth managed in broken English. The sergeant nodded. "Yes, ma'am. War's over. You need to eat." Elizabeth began crying, not from gratitude but from the collapse of every expectation. The Americans who'd bombed her city, who had every right to let Berlin starve, they were bringing food. They were treating defeated enemies like humans, requiring assistance rather than criminals deserving punishment. The mathematics of ruin. Berlin in summer 1945 was a humanitarian catastrophe requiring immediate intervention to prevent mass death. Nearly 3 million people remained in a city where 4 out of every 5 buildings couldn't provide shelter. The water system no longer functioned. Electricity was a memory. Sewage flowed into streets because underground pipes had been shattered. Civilians were dying daily from starvation, disease, and exposure. Without rapid intervention, tens of thousands more would die within weeks. American forces entering western sectors faced immediate crisis. Hundreds of thousands of civilians needed food, shelter, and medical care. The choice was clear: prevent humanitarian catastrophe or watch a city die. American military government chose intervention. The policy was practical. A starving, diseased Berlin would create security problems and propaganda victories for Soviet communism. A functioning Berlin under American administration would demonstrate democratic competence, but the policy also reflected American values about proper conduct even toward defeated enemies. Colonel Frank Howley, commanding American military government in Berlin, was direct. These people supported Hitler. Their government committed atrocities, but they're also starving civilians. We're going to prevent humanitarian catastrophe because that's what civilized nations do. We'll hold them accountable through proper legal processes while ensuring they don't die of starvation. That's how you occupy properly, with justice and humanity both. The first distribution, July 5, 1945. 615 hours. Elizabeth arrived 45 minutes early. At least 200 people already waited in lines organized by American military police, directing them with hand gestures and basic German. The crowd was mostly women, children, and elderly men. The younger men were dead, captured, or missing. Berlin's final defense had consumed a generation. At exactly 7 o'clock, distribution began. American soldiers at tables took information: name, address, family size, and issued ration cards. When Elizabeth reached the table, the soldier was patient with her broken English, carefully writing details. Your ration card. Present this at distribution. You'll receive rations for 4 people. Come every 3 days. Don't lose this card. Then she moved to actual distribution. The American soldier smiled slightly and began filling her bag. Bread. Real bread. Fresh enough she could smell it. Cans of meat, beans, vegetables. Powdered milk with instructions in German. Real coffee. Sugar. A small amount of fat for cooking. And then the soldier held up chocolate, gestured to indicate children, and smiled. Elizabeth took the bag with shaking hands. 3 minutes. Professional, efficient, impossibly generous. When she reached home and showed her mother and children, her daughter started crying. Her son touched the chocolate like it might disappear. Her mother stared. They're feeding us. I don't understand it, but they're feeding us. That evening, Elizabeth's family ate bread with real butter, beans with vegetables and meat, and each child had half a chocolate bar. Her daughter ate hers slowly, savoring. Her son devoured his quickly, then looked guilty. There will be more, Elizabeth told them. We go back in 3 days. Why are they helping us? Her son asked. Teacher said Americans were evil. Elizabeth didn't have an answer. Everything they'd been told had been wrong. The rebuilding begins. Beyond food distribution, American forces began systematic reconstruction of essential infrastructure. The priorities were practical: restore water, clear streets, repair buildings, reconnect electricity, establish sanitation to prevent disease. American engineers worked with German volunteers to accomplish these tasks with military efficiency. Within weeks, American bulldozers and German labor crews cleared major routes through rubble. Bricks were salvaged, metal sorted, debris organized. German women formed brigades doing manual clearing. They'd become known as Trümmerfrauen, rubble women, moving debris brick by brick through destroyed neighborhoods. Water system restoration was critical. Pipes were broken throughout the city. Pumping stations had been destroyed. American engineers surveyed damage while hiring German technical personnel who knew the infrastructure. By September, 60% of the American sector had running water. By December, 85%. Herr Otto Braun had been a civil engineer before the war. Now he was employed by American military government, working on water system restoration under Captain Robert Morrison's supervision. Otto had sworn after surrender never to work for occupiers. That lasted 3 weeks, until starving made dignity less important than survival. The work was hard, but meaningful. Every pipe repaired meant families could access clean water. Americans provided equipment, supplies, and fair treatment. When workers were injured, American medics treated them. There was no cruelty, just professional work relationships. 3 weeks in, Otto was working beside Morrison on a difficult pipe connection. They'd struggled for hours. Finally, Otto suggested a solution based on original system design. Morrison tried it. It worked. Good thinking, Morrison said in broken German. You know this stuff. Otto responded, strange, isn't it? Working together. Rebuilding what was destroyed. Morrison nodded. Better than destroying. That's what I keep telling myself. We're building now. That's got to mean something. By late August, water flowed from taps in buildings that had been dry for months. People could wash. Children could bathe. Basic sanitation became possible. Otto watched a family turn on a tap for the first time in months, saw the mother's tears, understood he was part of something larger than survival. He was helping rebuild civilization, and he was doing it alongside Americans who could have left Berlin to rot, but chose to help instead. The children remember. 7-year-old Klaus Schneider had known nothing but war. Born in 1938, he'd grown up under Nazi rule, survived bombing that killed his father. His world was ruins, hunger, fear. He'd been taught Americans were demons. Then he met his first American soldier while scavenging in rubble. Klaus was digging through debris when he heard English. He froze, terrified. A soldier appeared, young, with kind eyes. He said something Klaus didn't understand, then pulled out a chocolate bar and held it out. Klaus stared. This was a trick. Americans didn't give German children candy. But the soldier kept holding out chocolate, smiling, encouraging. Klaus's hunger overcame fear. He grabbed the chocolate and ran, expecting gunshots. No shots came. The American just laughed, amused by a scared child running with candy. Klaus ran home, showed his mother. She examined the Hershey bar carefully, checking for poison. Finally, she tasted it. Her eyes widened. It's real. An American soldier gave you real chocolate. They shared it that night. Klaus, his mother, his sister, his grandmother. Small pieces savored slowly. The sweetness was overwhelming. But more overwhelming was the implication. Americans gave children candy. The propaganda had been lies. Over following weeks, Klaus encountered more American soldiers. They gave him crackers, canned fruit, once an entire can of Spam. They smiled, asked his name in broken German, showed pictures of their own children. They weren't demons. They were men who missed their families and felt sorry for German children in ruins. Klaus started hanging around American positions with other neighborhood children. Soldiers would give them small tasks, carrying messages, showing them streets, and pay with food. Not slave labor, just simple jobs that helped soldiers navigate while giving children something to do and food to eat. Corporal Danny Walsh from Boston took special interest in Klaus. Walsh had a son Klaus's age back home. He'd show Klaus pictures, teach him English words, share rations. When Walsh learned Klaus hadn't been to school in over a year, he was horrified. Kids should be in school, Walsh said through a translator. Learning things, being kids, not scavenging in ruins. 2 weeks later, American military government announced reopening schools in western sectors. Buildings had been cleared, teachers vetted, supplies gathered. Klaus's mother received notice her children could attend starting September. On the first day, Klaus walked through cleared streets to a repaired building. Inside, German teachers taught from new textbooks. Not Nazi propaganda, but actual education. Some classes included basic English, taught by American soldiers who volunteered. Corporal Walsh was one of the volunteers. Klaus watched Walsh patiently help students pronounce words, smiling when they got it right. The same soldier who'd given him chocolate was now teaching him English in a school Americans had helped reopen, in a building Americans had helped repair. "Why are you helping us?" Klaus asked Walsh one day, his English improving. Walsh thought for a moment. "Because kids deserve better than war gave you. And because maybe if we help rebuild, there won't be another war." The contrast. The difference between American and Soviet occupation was stark and immediately visible. The Soviet sector experienced systematic looting, widespread violence against women, arbitrary arrests, minimal humanitarian assistance. Soviet soldiers viewed Berlin as conquered territory to exploit. Food distribution was chaotic when it occurred. Reconstruction was minimal. Civilians lived in fear. The American sector was orderly, relatively safe, focused on reconstruction. Food distribution was systematic. Women could walk streets without fearing assault. American military police enforced discipline against troops who misbehaved. Reconstruction proceeded efficiently. Berliners could see the difference. Those in Soviet sectors would travel to American sectors seeking food, safety, work. The contrast created powerful political implications. American democracy appeared competent and humane, while Soviet communism appeared brutal and exploitative. Elizabeth Miller lived near the sector boundary. We could see both sides. The Soviet sector was chaos. Soldiers drunk, women assaulted, no organization. The American sector was orderly. Distribution points that worked, soldiers who behaved professionally, actual reconstruction. Germans could see with their own eyes that American capitalism provided better lives than Soviet communism. The packages from home. In 1946, CARE, Cooperative for American Remittances to Europe, began sending relief packages to German civilians, funded by Americans who wanted to help former enemies. Each package cost $10 to send, substantial money in 1946, but thousands of Americans contributed. Packages arrived bearing address labels from Iowa, Texas, California, New York, Americans sending supplies to Germans they'd been fighting months earlier. The psychological impact exceeded material value. These weren't government rations distributed for strategic reasons. They were voluntary gifts from private citizens who'd chosen to help people who'd been their enemies. Elizabeth received a care package in spring 1946 from the Miller family, Milwaukee, Wisconsin. It contained canned meat, powdered milk, chocolate, coffee, knitted socks, and a handwritten note. "We hope this helps. We're praying for your family's recovery." I cried reading that note, Elizabeth remembered decades later. Americans whose city hadn't been bombed, who had no obligation to help. They'd voluntarily sent food to a German family they'd never meet. That generosity from former enemies taught me more about American values than any propaganda. The Nazis told us Americans were selfish. Instead, they were the most generous people I'd ever encountered. The schools come alive. American authorities prioritized reopening schools, recognizing children required education and structure after years of disruption. Schools were denazified, Nazi curricula replaced with materials emphasizing democratic values, racial equality, peaceful cooperation. American educational specialists worked with German teachers. Some soldiers volunteered to teach English or organize activities. Klaus Schneider started attending reopened school in autumn 1945. It felt normal, something from before the war. American soldiers who taught us English were patient and kind. They showed us pictures of American cities that weren't bombed. For the first time, I could imagine a future that wasn't just ruins and hunger. Schools became symbols of normalcy returning. Children who'd spent years indoctrinated or simply surviving could start being children again. Learning, playing, hoping for futures beyond mere survival. The moral weight. American Reconstruction efforts occurred against profound moral complexity about helping people who'd supported the Nazi regime. Many American soldiers struggled with this. They'd fought Germans, lost friends, seen concentration camps. Now they were ordered to help rebuild Berlin. The emotional contradiction was difficult. Private James Wilson wrote home, "We're helping rebuild the city we destroyed. We're feeding people who supported Hitler. Part of me resents it. But when I see the kids, hungry and scared, I can't hate them. They didn't choose this. So we do the work, even though it's complicated." I guess that's what makes us different from Nazis. We can show mercy even when it's hard. This moral complexity defined American occupation. Justice demanded accountability for Nazi crimes. Humanity demanded assistance for suffering civilians. American policy attempted both, prosecuting war criminals while feeding starving children, holding Germany responsible while helping Germans rebuild. The long investment. American Reconstruction assistance in Berlin was down payment on long-term strategic investment in European stability. The policy had multiple objectives: prevent mass starvation, maintain security, demonstrate American occupation meant recovery, not revenge, show capitalism could deliver better outcomes than ease recover. My children grew up seeing Americans as friends rather than conquerors. That's how you end a war properly, by making enemies into allies through choosing help over hatred. The final recognition. The ruins of Berlin in 1945 seem to represent only destruction and despair. But in those ruins, American soldiers and German civilians built something unexpected: cooperation between former enemies, trust between victor and vanquished, foundations for peace that would last generations. The city that had been destroyed became symbol of reconstruction. Enemy civilians who received help became advocates for alliance. Mercy shown in desperate circumstances became cornerstone of lasting peace. Otto Braun, the engineer who'd worked rebuilding water systems, reflected in 1987, "Americans could have left us to die. We'd supported Hitler, bombed their allies, killed their soldiers. They had every moral right to walk away and let us face consequences of our choices. Instead, they helped us rebuild. That wasn't weakness. That was strength guided by values we'd been taught to despise, but came to admire. They defeated us militarily, then defeated our ideology by demonstrating that democracy and compassion weren't weakness, but sources of real power." Elizabeth Miller, who'd stood in her destroyed kitchen that July morning expecting revenge but receiving food, lived until 1999. In her final interview, she summarized simply, "The Americans gave us back our lives. My children ate because of American rations. My city functioned because of American Reconstruction. I learned what civilization means by watching Americans choose to help rather than hate. That's a debt Germany can never fully repay, though we've tried through 70 years of alliance and friendship. The transformation from enemies to allies, from ruins to functioning city, from despair to hope. This was achieved not through speeches or propaganda, but through systematic assistance, fair treatment, communism. The Marshall Plan, announced in 1947, formalized this approach. The investment was substantial. Food aid to Berlin from 1945 to 1948 totaled approximately $200 million, equivalent to billions today. Construction materials, machinery, technical assistance. Thousands of Germans hired for reconstruction work. Marshall Plan aid to Germany from 1948 to 1952 reached approximately $1.4 billion. The returns exceeded investment. West Germany became prosperous democracy, reliable ally, economic powerhouse. Berlin became symbol of Western values versus Soviet oppression. The reconstruction assistance helped create stable, peaceful Europe, rather than breeding ground for future conflicts. The airlift's foundation. The reconstruction cooperation established during 1945-47 created foundation for Berlin airlift of 1948-49. When Soviets blockaded Berlin, cutting ground access to Western sectors, American and British forces responded with massive airlift supplying the city entirely by air for nearly a year. The airlift succeeded partly because groundwork had been laid. Berliners trusted Americans, cooperation networks existed, organization was established. The airlift became ultimate proof of American commitment. Former enemies whom Americans had helped rebuild now received extraordinary assistance when Soviets threatened to starve them into submission. Berliners never forgot that Americans chose to supply them rather than abandon them. The transformation measured. By 1948, Berlin's American sector had been substantially rebuilt. 75% of damaged buildings had been repaired or replaced. Water, electricity, and sanitation were restored to pre-war levels. Unemployment had dropped from 80% in 1945 to 15% in 1948. Adequate nutrition was available through combination of aid and restored local production. Crime rates had declined. Schools were reopened, enrollment approaching pre-war levels. Elizabeth Miller reflected on 3 years of transformation. In 1945, I stood in ruins expecting only more suffering. Americans came and helped us rebuild. Not because we deserved it, we didn't, but because they believed in helping even enemy and consistent demonstration that victory could include mercy. The Americans who helped rebuild Berlin proved that real power isn't just destroying enemies, but helping them rise again as partners in building something better than what war destroyed. In the gray morning light of July 1945, when American trucks rolled into Schöneberg carrying food instead of weapons, bringing supplies instead of requisitions, offering help instead of revenge, that was the moment Berlin's transformation began. Not through force or ideology, but through simple human decency applied systematically across a destroyed city, proving that civilization's strength shows most clearly not in how you wage war, but in how you build peace.